The sun was setting over the bustling streets of South Chicago, painting the sky in beautiful shades of orange and pink. It was that special time of day when the city seemed to slow down just a bit, letting people catch their breath after another busy day. In a quiet neighborhood where small family-owned shops lined the streets and everyone seemed to know each other, a young boy was walking home from school. This wasn't just any ordinary day for our 12-year-old hero. Basketball practice had run longer than usual, and his stomach was growling, reminding him of the untouched lunch still sitting in his backpack. His mom had packed it with extra care that morning: a peanut butter and honey sandwich, his favorite, a bright red apple, and even a small chocolate chip cookie she had baked the night before. As he walked, he could feel the weight of his basketball shoes bumping against his backpack with each step. His school uniform was slightly wrinkled from the day's activities, and a few curls stuck to his forehead from the afternoon practice. But despite being tired, there was a spring in his step. His coach had just told him he was improving, and that made all the extra practice worth it. The path home took him through Jefferson Park, a peaceful spot where elderly couples often sat on benches feeding pigeons, and young mothers pushed strollers along the winding paths. The trees were starting to change colors, dropping occasional leaves that crunched satisfyingly under his feet. He loved this part of his walk home. It was like a small escape from the city's noise. Today felt different, though. Maybe it was because he was walking home later than usual, or maybe it was because his stomach was still full of butterflies from making those three-pointers at practice. Whatever the reason, he noticed things he usually rushed past, like how the old oak trees created perfect patches of shade on the ground, and how the park fountain made a gentle splashing sound that seemed to calm everything around it. That's when he saw him, an elderly man sitting alone on one of the park's weathered wooden benches. There was something about the way the man sat that caught the boy's attention. His back was straight, showing a hint of his former pride, but his hands trembled slightly as they gripped a worn walking cane. The man's clothes, though clean and neat, had seen better days. His brown jacket was thin for the autumn weather, and his shoes showed signs of many repairs. The boy slowed his pace, watching as the old man tried to adjust his position on the bench. The movement seemed difficult, and the trembling in his hands became more noticeable. Something in the boy's heart tugged at him. It reminded him of his own grandfather, who had passed away 2 years ago. His mom had always taught him that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could make the biggest difference in someone's day. Looking down at his still full lunch bag, then back at the elderly man, he made a decision. His mom had always packed more than enough food, saying a growing boy needed his strength. But right now, he thought, maybe someone else needed that strength more than him. What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that nobody in the park that day could have predicted. Sometimes the biggest changes in our lives start with the smallest choices, like deciding to share a sandwich with a stranger on an autumn afternoon in Jefferson Park. Little did our young friend know that his simple act of kindness was about to touch not just one life, but an entire community. And somewhere nearby, hidden from view, someone was watching this scene unfold, someone whose own life would be forever changed by witnessing what was about to happen next. The cool breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the sweet scent of fallen leaves, as the boy took his first step toward the bench. In that moment, he wasn't thinking about his rumbling stomach, or his tired legs from basketball practice, or even about getting home late. He was thinking about something his mother always said: when you have a chance to be kind, take it. You never know how much someone might need it. His heart beat a little faster as he approached the bench, clutching his lunch bag a bit tighter. He wasn't usually shy, but there was something about this moment that felt important, like he was about to step through a door into something bigger than himself. The elderly man hadn't noticed him yet, lost in his own thoughts as he gazed at the falling leaves. The boy took a deep breath, gathered his courage, and prepared to say hello. What he didn't realize was that this simple hello would be the beginning of a story that would soon spread throughout their entire neighborhood, touching hearts and changing lives in ways he could never have imagined. But that's how the best stories often start, with a single step, a single word, a single act of kindness that ripples out into the world in unexpected ways. Taking those final steps toward the bench felt like walking through honey, slow and deliberate. The young boy could hear his heartbeat in his ears, but something inside told him this was the right thing to do. As he got closer, he could see more details about the elderly man that he hadn't noticed from far away. The man's face was lined with wrinkles that spoke of years of both laughter and hardship. His eyes, though tired, held a gentle warmth that reminded the boy of story time with his grandfather. The old man's silver hair caught the afternoon sunlight, making it look like it was sprinkled with tiny stars. Despite his worn clothes, there was something dignified about the way he held himself, like someone who had seen much in life, but hadn't let it break his spirit. When the boy was about 5 steps away, a twig snapped under his foot. The sound made the elderly man look up, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither said anything. The old man's expression changed from surprise to curiosity, then to a gentle smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. His hands, still trembling slightly on his cane, adjusted their grip. "Hello there, young man," the elderly gentleman said, his voice warm but a bit shaky, like autumn leaves rustling in the wind. The boy noticed a slight accent in his words, one that hinted at stories from faraway places and different times. The boy shifted his weight from one foot to the other, suddenly aware of his scuffed school shoes and the way his uniform shirt had come partially untucked during basketball practice. But the kind look in the old man's eyes gave him courage. "Ha," he replied, his voice coming out stronger than he expected. Would you like to share my lunch?" The elderly man's eyebrows rose in surprise, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. His eyes moved from the boy's face to the brown paper bag clutched in his hands, then back to his face again. The boy could see him thinking, processing this unexpected offer from a stranger so many years his junior. "That's very kind of you," the old man finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "But surely you must be hungry yourself." As if on cue, the boy's stomach growled softly, making them both laugh. The sound of their shared laughter seemed to break down any remaining walls between them. "My mom always packs extra," the boy explained, already moving to sit on the bench. He left a respectful space between them, just like his mother had taught him. "She says sharing food makes it taste better." He began carefully unpacking his lunch, laying out the sandwich, apple, and cookie on the clean paper bag between them. As he divided the sandwich with the care of a master chef, the old man watched with eyes that grew mistier by the second. "You know," he said softly, "you remind me of someone I used to know many years ago." His hands still trembled as he reached for his half of the sandwich, and without making a big show of it, the boy moved it slightly closer to make it easier for him to grasp. The autumn breeze carried the sweet scent of nearby flowering bushes, mixing with the familiar comfort of peanut butter and honey. Other park visitors walked by, some slowing down to observe this unusual pair sharing lunch on a park bench. But the boy and the old man hardly noticed, already deep in conversation. The elderly man told him about the park in different seasons, how the spring brought new birds he could name by their songs alone, how summer filled the air with the laughter of playing children, and how winter transformed the fountain into a natural ice sculpture. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, as if the simple act of sharing stories was giving him new energy. What the boy didn't know was that this wasn't just any ordinary conversation. The old man hadn't spoken to anyone properly in weeks, living alone in his small apartment with only his memories for company. His trembling hands weren't just from age. They were a reminder of an illness that had slowly taken away his independence, making even simple tasks like eating in public an embarrassing challenge. But here, in this moment, none of that seemed to matter. The boy's simple act of kindness had created a bubble of warmth around them, where age didn't matter, where trembling hands weren't something to be ashamed of, and where a shared sandwich could bridge a gap of 60 years. As they finished their meal, the boy carefully split the chocolate chip cookie into 2 perfect halves. The old man's eyes twinkled as he accepted his portion, handling it like it was made of gold. "You know," he said, looking at the cookie with a gentle smile, "it's been a very long time since anyone has shared their dessert with me." Neither of them knew it yet, but this simple lunch would be the beginning of something extraordinary. And somewhere nearby, hidden from their view, someone was watching this scene unfold with growing interest, someone whose own life was about to take an unexpected turn because of what they were witnessing. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park, and the fountain's gentle splashing provided a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. As they sat there, enjoying their shared cookie, neither the boy nor the old man realized that this was just the beginning of a story that would touch many more lives than just their own. As they finished the last crumbs of their shared cookie, the boy noticed how the old man's trembling hands had steadied a bit. Maybe it was the food, or maybe it was just having someone to talk to, but there was more color in his cheeks now, and his eyes sparkled with life. The simple act of sharing lunch had somehow made the park bench feel like the most natural place in the world for both of them to be. "You play basketball?" the old man asked, nodding toward the boy's sports bag. When the boy's face lit up with excitement, the old man smiled knowingly. "I can tell by how you carry yourself, an athlete's posture, even at your age." The boy sat up a little straighter, proud that someone had noticed. "Yes, sir. I just started getting better at three-pointers," he said, his words tumbling out with enthusiasm. "Coach says I'm improving." He stopped suddenly, feeling shy about his outburst, but the old man's encouraging nod made him continue. "Would you like to see?" the boy asked, reaching for his basketball. The old man's eyes crinkled with joy at the invitation. "I would love to," he replied, adjusting his position on the bench to get a better view of the nearby court. The boy dribbled the ball a few times, then took his position. His tongue stuck out slightly at the corner of his mouth as he concentrated, a habit his mother always teased him about. The old man watched intently as the boy took his shot. The ball asked through the air, hitting the backboard before swishing through the net. "Excellent form," the old man called out, clapping despite his trembling hands. "You remind me of when I used to coach basketball many years ago." The boy's eyes widened with interest as he retrieved the ball. "You were a coach." What happened next turned their simple lunch sharing into something much more meaningful. The old man began sharing stories from his coaching days, his voice growing stronger with each memory. He explained how he had coached at a local high school for over 30 years, helping countless young players develop their skills and confidence. "The secret," he said, gesturing with hands that seemed to shake less as he demonstrated, "is in your follow-through. Here, let me show you." He began describing the perfect shooting technique, using his hands to illustrate the motion. The boy listened intently, soaking up every word like a sponge. Time seemed to float away as they moved between basketball tips and life stories. The old man shared tales of championship games and lessons learned from losses, while the boy practiced his shooting technique under the watchful eye of his new mentor. Other park visitors smiled as they passed by, touched by the sight of young and old bonding over the bounce of a basketball. What made this moment even more special was how natural it felt. There was no awkwardness about their age difference or the old man's trembling hands. They were just two people sharing their love for the game, learning from each other in ways neither had expected when this day began. As the boy demonstrated his improved shooting technique, the old man noticed something that brought tears to his eyes. Without even realizing it, the young athlete had adapted his movements to mirror the guidance he'd just received. "You're a quick learner," he said softly, his voice filled with pride. The boy beamed at the praise, but what touched him most was how the old man spoke to him, not as a child, but as someone worthy of respect and serious coaching. It reminded him of how his grandfather used to treat him, and that thought made him feel both happy and a little sad at the same time. Meanwhile, unknown to both of them, someone else in the park was still watching their interaction with growing interest. This observer had seen everything from the shared lunch to the impromptu basketball lesson, and their mind was already spinning with possibilities. As the afternoon light began to soften, the boy realized he should probably head home soon. But before he packed up his basketball, he turned to the old man with hope in his eyes. "Will you be here tomorrow?" he asked, trying not to sound too eager. "I bring lunch every day, and, well, Mom always packs extra." The old man's face broke into the warmest smile yet, his eyes twinkling with joy and unshed tears. "I would like that very much," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "Perhaps we could work on that jump shot some more." The boy nodded enthusiastically, already excited about tomorrow. As he shouldered his backpack and picked up his basketball, he felt different somehow, like this afternoon had changed something important inside him. The old man watched him gather his things, still smiling that warm smile that made his whole face light up. "Thank you," the old man said quietly, and somehow the boy knew he wasn't just talking about the shared lunch. "No, thank you," the boy replied, meaning every word. "For the basketball tips and everything." As the boy started his walk home, he turned back one last time to wave. The old man raised his trembling hand in response, and in that moment, both of them knew that something special had begun in that park, something that would grow into more than either of them could imagine. The hidden observer, still watching from a distance, smiled to themselves. Sometimes the most beautiful stories in life start with the simplest acts of kindness, like sharing a sandwich and a basketball lesson on an autumn afternoon in the park. The mystery observer who had been watching the heartwarming scene unfold was a woman in her early 40s, dressed in a simple but elegant business suit. She'd been taking her usual afternoon walks through the park to clear her head after long days at the technology company she led. Today's walk, however, had given her something much more meaningful to think about. She had first noticed them yesterday, the young boy and the elderly man sharing lunch on the bench. Today, she had deliberately chosen the same path, curious to see if their meeting had been a one-time occurrence. What she witnessed touched her heart in a way she hadn't expected. From her discreet vantage point near the flowering bushes, she could see every detail of their interaction. The way the boy carefully split his lunch, how he positioned the food to make it easier for the old man's trembling hands to grasp, and most touchingly, how naturally they connected despite their age difference. The basketball lesson she'd just witnessed had brought tears to her eyes. As the head of a successful company, she spent her days in boardrooms making big decisions. But right now, watching this simple scene of human kindness, she felt something shift inside her. Her own grandfather had passed away recently, and seeing this young boy's compassion stirred memories of the times they had shared. She pulled out her phone and began making notes, her mind already working on ideas. Her company had been looking for meaningful ways to give back to the community. Maybe this was the inspiration they needed, something that could connect generations and make a real difference in people's lives. The next day, she arrived at the park a little earlier than usual. The autumn air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched under her comfortable walking shoes, a change from her usual office heels. She watched as the boy arrived right on schedule, carrying his lunch bag and basketball just like before. The elderly man was already there, sitting straighter today, his face brightening as he spotted the young boy approaching. She noticed he had put on a warmer jacket, though it still looked well worn. As she observed their interaction, she could hear bits of their conversation carried by the breeze. They were discussing basketball strategies and sharing stories about their families. Today, the boy had brought something extra, a small thermos. Steam rose from the cups they shared, and she could see the old man's hands warming around his portion. The simple sight of them sharing hot chocolate on the cool autumn day made her smile. She continued watching as the boy demonstrated new basketball moves, the old man offering gentle corrections and encouragement. Their dynamic was beautiful to witness, the young boy's energy and enthusiasm perfectly balanced with the elderly man's wisdom and patience. Making her decision, she smoothed her jacket and began walking toward their bench. Her heart beat a little faster. She hadn't planned exactly what to say, which was unusual for someone who gave speeches to hundreds of people regularly. But sometimes, she reminded herself, the most important moments in life come from the heart, not from carefully planned speeches. As she approached, both the boy and the old man looked up, curious about this unexpected interruption to their daily routine. She smiled warmly, trying to put them at ease. "I hope you'll forgive me," she began, her voice gentle, "but I couldn't help noticing your friendship over the past few days." The boy looked slightly shy but proud, while the old man's eyes twinkled with interest. She explained who she was, the CEO of a local technology company, and how that interactions had touched her heart. As she spoke, she could see them both relaxing, the old man nodding encouragingly. "What you two have created here," she continued, gesturing to their shared bench, "is something special. It's made me think about how many other people in our community could benefit from connections like this." She paused, watching their reactions carefully. "I have a proposal for you both, if you're willing to hear it." The boy glanced at his elderly friend, who gave him a gentle nod. Their silent communication spoke volumes about the trust they'd built in just a few days. The woman's heart warmed at this subtle interaction. It confirmed that her instincts about them were right. As the fountain bubbled quietly in the background and autumn leaves danced around their feet, she began sharing her vision. She explained how her company could help create a program that would connect young people with elderly residents in their community, providing opportunities for sharing meals, stories, and skills. But she added quickly, seeing a flash of concern cross the boy's face, "This bench, this time, it would still be yours. Your friendship inspired the idea, but it's special and should stay that way." The relief and joy on both their faces told her she'd said the right thing. As she finished explaining her thoughts, a gentle breeze rustled through the trees, seeming to emphasize the importance of the moment. The old man's eyes were misty with emotion, and the boy was practically bouncing with excitement about the possibility of helping other people create connections like theirs. What none of them knew in that moment was how this conversation would grow into something that would change not just their lives, but the lives of countless others in their community. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments, like sharing lunch on a park bench, unaware that someone is watching. What started as a simple shared lunch became something truly magical over the next few weeks. Every day after basketball practice, the boy would arrive at the park with his brown paper bag, now packed with extra care by his mother who had learned about his new friend. She always included something special, sometimes homemade cookies, other times a warm soup in a thermos, or occasionally the old man's favorite sandwich, which they discovered was tuna with extra pickles. The park bench had become their special place. Rain or shine, they would meet there, sharing not just food, but pieces of their lives. The old man's trembling hands grew steadier when he demonstrated basketball techniques, and his eyes lit up whenever he talked about his days as a coach. He shared stories about championship games from decades ago, describing every play as if it had happened yesterday. You know, the old man said one particularly sunny afternoon, "I used to play jazz music too." The boy's eyes widened with interest as his friend continued. "I played the trumpet in a small band. We weren't famous, but we made people happy. That was enough for us." The boy listened intently as the old man described the feeling of playing in smoky jazz clubs, the way the music would flow through him like magic. "It was like basketball," he explained, his hands moving to an invisible rhythm. "You have to feel it in your soul, let it become part of you." Their conversations ranged from serious to silly. The old man taught the boy about jazz legends and basketball heroes, while the boy shared stories about school, his family, and his dreams of becoming a professional basketball player. Sometimes they would just sit quietly, watching the pigeons waddle by or counting the leaves as they fell from the trees. Other park regulars began to notice their special friendship. The ice cream vendor would sometimes stop by with free popsicles, saying they were extras that would melt anyway. The morning joggers would wave as they passed, and parents with young children would smile at the sight of them sharing lunch and stories. One day, the boy arrived to find his friend looking a bit down. "My wife loved days like this," the old man said softly, looking at the clear autumn sky. It was the first time he'd mentioned her, and the boy sat quietly, sensing the importance of the moment. "She passed away 3 years ago. Sometimes the quiet in my apartment gets so loud, you know." The boy reached into his lunch bag and pulled out a chocolate chip cookie, the old man's favorite. Without saying a word, he broke it in half and handed over the bigger piece. Sometimes, he had learned, you don't need words to show someone you care. Meanwhile, the woman who had observed their friendship continued to work behind the scenes. She met with community leaders, talked to other business owners, and started laying the groundwork for something bigger. But she was careful to keep her promise. The park bench remained their special place, untouched by the growing plans around them. The boy's mother noticed changes in her son too. He became more patient, more thoughtful. He started helping elderly neighbors with their groceries and teaching younger kids at the basketball court. The old man's influence was spreading through him like ripples in a pond. One chilly afternoon, as they shared hot chocolate from the boy's thermos, the old man pulled something from his coat pocket, a small worn photograph. It showed a much younger version of himself in a basketball uniform, surrounded by smiling players. "That was my championship team from 1975, he said proudly. "Would you like to hear about that game?" The boy nodded eagerly, scooting closer on the bench as the old man began to tell the story. His hands, usually shaky, moved smoothly through the air as he described the final play that won the game. His voice grew stronger with each word, transformed by the joy of sharing this precious memory. What made their connection so special wasn't just the food they shared or the stories they told, it was how they saw each other. The boy didn't see a trembling old man with worn-out clothes, he saw a wise coach with amazing stories. The old man didn't see a young kid spending time with him out of pity, he saw a bright, kind soul who genuinely enjoyed their time together. As autumn deepened and the days grew shorter, their afternoon meetings became a bright spot that both looked forward to. The old man would arrive early, watching the school kids walk home, his heart lifting when he spotted his young friend's familiar figure approaching with that brown paper lunch bag. Neither of them knew that their simple friendship was about to inspire something much bigger. Sometimes the most beautiful stories start with the smallest gestures, like sharing lunch with someone who needs more than just food to fill their hunger. The day everything changed started like any other. The boy hurried through the park after basketball practice, excited to share the news about making the winning shot in their practice game. But when he reached their bench, something felt wrong. The familiar figure wasn't there waiting for him. At first, he thought maybe his friend was just running late. He sat down on their bench, pulling out his lunch bag and arranging everything neatly as he always did. He waited, watching other people walk by, but the old man didn't appear. As minutes ticked by, worry started creeping into his heart. A regular park visitor, an elderly lady who often fed the pigeons nearby, noticed him sitting alone. She walked over slowly, her face carrying a concerned expression. "Are you looking for your friend?" she asked gently. When the boy nodded, she sighed softly. "He was taken to the hospital early this morning. One of the neighbors saw the ambulance." The boy's heart dropped like a stone in a deep well. The sandwich in his hands suddenly felt heavy, and the world seemed to grow a little darker. "Which hospital?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, but the lady didn't know. That afternoon, for the first time since their friendship began, the boy walked home with his lunch uneaten. His feet felt like they were made of lead, and even the golden autumn sunshine couldn't lift his spirits. His mother noticed something was wrong the moment he walked through the door. As he told her what happened, tears started rolling down his cheeks. He couldn't help but think about his friend's trembling hands, wondering if they were okay. His mother held him close, stroking his hair the way she always did when he was upset. "We'll find him," she promised, and something in her voice made him believe her. The next day at the park, the boy was surprised to see the businesswoman who had spoken to them earlier. She was sitting on their bench, as if waiting for him. When she saw his red-rimmed eyes and worried face, her heart melted. "I heard about your friend," she said softly, patting the spot next to her on the bench. "I made some calls this morning. He's at City General Hospital. The doctors say he had a minor stroke, but he's stable now." She watched as relief flooded the boy's face. "Can I visit him?" he asked eagerly, practically bouncing on the bench. The woman smiled, pulling out her phone. "I already spoke to his doctors and the hospital staff. We can go right now if your mom says it's okay." One quick phone call later, they were in the woman's car, heading to the hospital. The boy clutched his lunch bag tightly. He had packed extra cookies today, just in case. The businesswoman glanced at him in the rearview mirror, touched by his obvious concern for his elderly friend. Walking through the hospital corridors felt strange and a little scary. The walls were too white, the lights too bright, and everything smelled like cleaning supplies. But the boy held his head high, remembering how his friend always said courage wasn't about not being scared. It was about doing what's right even when you were scared. When they reached the room, the boy hesitated for just a moment. Through the door's window, he could see his friend lying in the hospital bed, looking smaller somehow in a white hospital gown. But when the old man turned and saw him, his face lit up like a Christmas tree. "My young friend." The old man called out, his voice a bit weaker but still warm with joy. The boy rushed in, careful not to disturb any of the tubes or machines around the bed. He was relieved to see his friend sitting up, even though he looked tired. "I brought lunch," the boy said, holding up his paper bag. "Mom made your favorite, tuna with extra pickles." The old man's eyes welled up with tears, and he reached out with his trembling hand to pat the boy's arm. The businesswoman watched from the doorway as they settled into their familiar routine, sharing lunch and stories just like they did in the park. The hospital room might have been different from their park bench, but the magic of their friendship remained the same. The nurse who came to check on the patient couldn't help but smile at the scene. The young boy carefully breaking cookies into manageable pieces for his elderly friend, telling him about basketball practice, and making him laugh with stories about his day at school. What none of them knew was that this hospital visit would lead to something even more amazing. Sometimes the biggest changes in our lives come from the scariest moments, and sometimes it takes almost losing something precious to realize just how important it really is. The woman watching from the doorway had tears in her eyes as she made a silent promise to herself. This friendship, this pure and beautiful connection between young and old, wouldn't just inspire her planned community program, it would become its heart and soul. 3 months had passed since that scary day at the hospital, and the park had changed with the seasons. Winter's chill had given way to early spring, with tiny buds appearing on the trees where autumn leaves had once fallen. But the biggest changes weren't in the park itself, they were in the lives of the people who gathered there. The old man had recovered stronger than anyone expected. The doctor said it was his determination, but those who knew him better understood it was something else, the power of friendship and the knowledge that someone was waiting for him on that park bench every day. That bench had become more than just their meeting place. Thanks to the businesswoman's vision and hard work, it had become the starting point of something beautiful. The Bench Buddies program, they called it, though the old man would chuckle every time he heard the name. On this particular spring afternoon, the park was busier than usual. Near their special bench, several other benches had been added, each one occupied by pairs of people, young and old together, sharing lunches, stories, and friendship. The businesswoman's idea had blossomed into something more wonderful than anyone could have imagined. "Look at that," the old man said proudly, watching a teenage girl teaching an elderly woman how to use a smartphone. Nearby, a retired mechanic was showing a young boy how to fix a bicycle chain. All of this because you decided to share your lunch with a trembling old man. The boy smiled, carefully unwrapping their usual shared sandwich. His friend's hands still shook sometimes, but not as much as before. The doctors said the regular social interaction and activity had done wonders for his health. "Mom says kindness is like a boomerang," the boy replied. "It always comes back to you." The businesswoman had kept her promise. Their original bench remained their special place. But she had done so much more. Her company had created a foundation that provided support for elderly residents in the community. They organized regular meetups, helped with medical appointments, and even set up a small community center near the park. The boy's mother had become an important part of the program too. She now coordinated the food sharing initiative, teaching young volunteers how to prepare and pack meals for their elderly friends. Her tuna sandwiches with extra pickles had become famous among the participants. As they sat enjoying their lunch, they watched a news crew setting up nearby. The businesswoman had told them their story had inspired similar programs in other cities. Today, they were being interviewed for a special report about community connections. The old man had polished his shoes for the occasion, and the boy was wearing his best basketball jersey. "Remember that first day?" the boy asked, breaking their cookie into shares. "I was so nervous to come talk to you." The old man chuckled, his eyes twinkling with memory. "And look at us now, we're going to be on television. Though I still say the best part of my day is sharing lunch with my young friend." A group of kids from the local basketball team ran past, waving at them. The old man had become something of a legend at their games, sharing coaching tips and stories from his championship days. His trembling hands would steady when he demonstrated shooting techniques, muscle memory taking over as he shared his passion for the game. The businesswoman walked over, smiling warmly at them both. "Are you ready for your interview?" she asked. But before they could answer, she was distracted by a commotion at the park entrance. A bus had arrived, bringing elderly residents from the local retirement home for their weekly Bench Buddies meetup. "Your simple act of kindness," she said, turning back to them, "has brought together over 300 pairs of friends in our community alone. And we're just getting started." Her eyes shone with happy tears as she watched more young volunteers rushing to help their elderly friends from the bus. The old man reached out and patted the boy's hand with his slightly trembling one. "You know what the best medicine is?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. "It's not the pills they gave me at the hospital. It's this: friendship, purpose, feeling needed and valued. You gave me that gift with half a sandwich and a kind heart." As the news crew approached their bench, the boy looked around at all the lives that had been touched by their simple friendship. Young people were learning from their elderly friends' experiences, while older folks were getting a new lease on life through these connections. The park had become a place where age didn't matter, where wisdom was shared alongside technology tips, and where every lunch was an opportunity for magic to happen. "Ready?" the old man asked, straightening his jacket as the reporter walked over. The boy nodded, but they both knew the real story wasn't in the interview they were about to give. The real story was in every shared sandwich, every gentle laugh, every moment of connection between young and old across the park. Sometimes the biggest changes in the world start with the smallest acts of kindness, like a young boy sharing his lunch with an elderly man, unaware that someone was watching. And sometimes those small acts of kindness grow into something so beautiful, it changes not just two lives, but an entire community.